The silence in the dining room wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that has teeth, biting into the back of your neck until you're forced to look down at your plate. I sat there, staring at a piece of dry pot roast, listening to the clinking of silverware against fine china. My mother, Elena, was laughing, that bright, melodic laugh she uses when she wants the world to know she's perfectly happy. "Oh, Julian," she chirruped, leaning toward my older brother. "The way you handled that merger. It's just so prestigious. I told the girls at the garden club that my son is basically running the city now." Julian smirked, basking in the glow of the golden child spotlight. My younger sister, Claire, chimed in about her upcoming internship at a high-end law firm. They were a portrait of success. And then there was me. The daughter who wore scrubs instead of suits. The daughter who spent her nights cleaning bedpans and holding the hands of the dying in a hospice ward. "Anyway," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave as she finally turned her eyes toward me. The warmth vanished. "We've decided on the Mother's Day brunch. It's at the Sterling. It's very exclusive, Maya. Business attire only. They have a reputation to uphold." I felt the familiar sting. "I can buy a suit, Mom. I'm not coming in my uniform." She didn't even blink. "It's not just the clothes, dear. It's the energy. We want this year to be about attainment. About people who have really made something of themselves. I think it's best if you just sit this one out. You'll probably be tired from your little shift anyway. It's for the best." The best. That word felt like a slap. I wasn't being invited to celebrate my mother. I was being edited out of the family photo because my job didn't have a corner office. I looked at Julian. He looked at his wine. I looked at Claire. He checked her watch. I realized then that I wasn't just being excluded from a brunch. I was being erased from their lives. But they didn't know one thing. While they were busy measuring worth in dollar signs and titles, I was learning the value of a soul. And I was about to make a choice that would change everything. You think you know what it's like to be the black sheep. But you haven't seen what happens when the black sheep finally decides to stop trying to fit into the flock. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just started planning my exit. And the first step. It started with a phone call I should have made years ago. I walked out of that dinner without saying a word. That was the first time I didn't defend myself. Usually, I'd give a speech about the nobility of nursing, about how I've looked into the eyes of people who have everything and realized they'd trade it all for one more hour of breath. But why bother? To Elena, if it doesn't come with a LinkedIn update, it doesn't exist. I drove back to my tiny apartment, the engine of my beat-up sedan humming a lonely tune. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It's funny how a mother's rejection feels different than any other pain. It's primal. It's like your foundation is made of sand. I thought about all the Mother's Days before this. The handmade cards she threw away. The flowers I bought with my first paycheck that she said didn't match the decor. I had spent 26 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for me. The next morning I went to work. Room 402. Mr. Henderson. He was 84, a former carpenter with hands like gnarled oak roots. He was dying and he knew it. "You're quiet today, Maya," he rasped, his eyes tracking me as I checked his four. "Just thinking, Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to force a smile. "Bad thinking," he grunted. "I can see it in your shoulders. You're carrying a backpack full of stones that don't belong to you. Drop 'em. Life's too short to carry someone else's luggage." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see a patient. I saw a mirror. I was carrying Elena's expectations, Julian's arrogance, and Claire's indifference. Why? That afternoon I called a realtor in a city 3 states away. A place where the air was salty and nobody knew my name. I had a savings account they didn't know about, the in case of fire fund. Well, the house was burning down. But before I could leave, I had to face the gold standard one last time. Elena called. She didn't call to apologize. She called to ask if I could come over and help her prep the house for her pre-brunch cocktail party. She wanted the daughter she rejected to do the manual labor so the successful children could stay pristine. I agreed. I told her I'd be there. But I wasn't going there to clean. I was going there to deliver a message. And by the time the sun set on that cocktail party, the perfect family dynamic was going to be shattered into a million jagged pieces. The day of the pre-brunch cocktail party arrived, and my mother's house was a hive of frantic, shallow energy. I walked in through the back door, the familiar scent of expensive lilies and floor wax hitting me like a physical weight. Elena was in the kitchen, snapping at a caterer about the garnish on the smoked salmon. "Maya." "Finally," she said, not looking at me. "The silver in the dining room needs a buff, and I need you to rearrange the seating cards. Julian's new business partner is coming, and I need the power players clustered together. You know how it is." "I know exactly how it is, Mom," I said quietly. I picked up the silver cloth. My hands moved with a precision they'd learned from years of medical procedures, but my mind was miles away. I looked at the seating chart. Julian at the head, Claire next to a senator's son, and a glaring empty space where my name should have been. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited to the brunch tomorrow. I was being treated like a ghost at today's party too. As the guests began to arrive, men in charcoal suits and women dripping in diamonds, I stayed in the shadows of the kitchen and the hallway. I watched them. They spoke in buzzwords. They laughed at jokes that weren't funny just to show they were in the loop. Then I saw Julian in the corner, huddled with a man I didn't recognize. His face was pale, his eyes darting toward the door. He wasn't acting like a power player. He looked like a man watching a fuse burn down. I moved closer, blending into the background as I straightened a curtain. "The audit is Monday, Julian," the man whispered. "If those accounts aren't squared, the prestigious son is going to be the indicted son. Does your mother know?" "She can't know," Julian hissed. "She's already told the entire social circle I'm the next CEO. If this breaks, her heart won't be the only thing that stops. Her reputation is her life." Froze. The perfection was a lie. The attainment they looked down on me for was built on a foundation of crumbling paper. I had the power to blow it all up right then. One word to the girls at the garden club, and the house of cards would fold. But I had a different plan. One that didn't involve revenge. Only a very long, very permanent silence. The party was in full swing. Laughter echoed off the marble floors, and the champagne was flowing like water. Elena was center stage, holding court. She looked radiant, the very picture of a successful matriarch. "And Maya," she said, catching sight of me as I passed through with a tray of empty glasses. The guests turned. She gave a tight, patronizing smile. "Maya is our little saint. She works at the hospital. It's taxing work, but someone has to do the dirty jobs, right?" Few people chuckled. A woman in a silk wrap gave me a look of pure pity, the kind you give a stray dog. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the chatter. "I'm leaving." "Yes, dear, go finish the dishes," she said, trying to wave me away. "No," I said, stepping into the circle of light. "I'm leaving. For good. My bags are in the car. My apartment is cleared out. And as for your brunch tomorrow at the Sterling, don't worry about my energy ruining the mood. I won't be there. Or anywhere near you, ever again." The room went silent. The clinking of ice stopped. Elena's face turned a shade of mottled red I'd never seen before. "Maya, don't be dramatic. We're in front of guests. That's the only time you care, isn't it? When people are watching." I looked at Julian, who was staring at his shoes, and Claire, who looked bored. I spent my life trying to be enough for a family that values paper over people. But I've spent my nights with people who are dying, and do you know what they regret? They never regret not being prestigious. They regret not being real. I set the tray down on a mahogany side table with a sharp clack. "Have a wonderful brunch, Mom. I hope the smoked salmon is worth the price of your daughter." I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I heard her start to shrill my name, the mask finally slipping, but the heavy oak door thudded shut behind me, muffling the sound of a world I no longer belonged to. I got into my car and started the engine. But as I pulled out of the driveway, I saw a black sedan idling at the end of the street. It was the man from the kitchen, the auditor. The storm wasn't just coming. It was landfall. And I was the only one who had escaped the blast zone. 300 miles. That's how far I drove that first night. I didn't stop until the air coming through the vents started to smell like salt and decaying kelp. The sun was coming up over the coast of a sleepy town in Maine, a place so far removed from the high-rises and ego of my old life it felt like another planet. I found a small motel and slept for 12 hours. No alarms. No pages. No Mother's Day brunch. When I woke up, the silence was incredible. It wasn't the biting silence of my mother's dining room. It was the quiet of a blank page. I spent the next week in a daze of normalcy. I found a small cottage for rent, shingles missing, porch leaning to the left, but it had a view of the water that made my chest ache. I applied for a job at the local hospice center. The head nurse, a woman named Martha with skin like parchment and eyes like flint, looked at my resume. "You're overqualified for this little clinic, Maya. Why are you here?" "Because I want to work where the person matters more than the title," I said. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "Start Monday. We don't have fancy equipment, but we have heart. Hope you brought yours." Ahead. For the first time, I felt it beating for myself instead of for someone else's approval. But the past has a way of catching up, even through the fog. I turned on my phone for the first time in 6 days. 142 missed calls. Mostly from Julian. Few from Claire. None from Elena. I opened the news app for my hometown. The headline hit me like a physical blow. Local investment firm under investigation for massive fraud. CEO's son questioned. They were drowning. The attainment they worshipped had become their anchor. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Julian. It read, "Mom is in the hospital. She won't speak to anyone but you. She says you're the only one who knows where the offshore gift accounts are. Maya, please. Everything is gone." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the light reflecting off the peeling wallpaper of my new cottage. Julian's text felt like a ghost reaching out from a grave I'd already dug and filled. "Mom is in the hospital. She won't speak to anyone but you." It's funny how the people who spend their lives making you feel small suddenly find you very important when their world catches fire. For years, I was the daughter who didn't matter. Now I was the keeper of the keys. Those gift accounts Julian mentioned. I knew about them. Not because I was part of their schemes, but because I was the one who always did the filing, the one who organized the boring paperwork while they toasted to their own brilliance. I had seen the transfers. I had seen the offshore routing numbers. I had tucked them away in a folder labeled Family History, thinking they were just more of Elena's prestige investments. I didn't reply. Not that night. I walked out onto my leaning porch and watched the tide come in. The Atlantic doesn't care about investment fraud. It doesn't care about a mother who uses her daughter as a social prop. Just moves. The next morning at the hospice, Martha looked at me. "You're vibrating, Maya. Whatever's chasing you, it's gained ground. You going to let it catch you?" "They need something from me, Martha," I said, cleaning a blood pressure cuff. "Something that could save them. Or ruin them." "In this building," Martha said, gesturing to the rooms of the dying, "we learn that the only thing worth saving is the truth. Everything else is just luggage." I went to the local library and used their secure computer. I pulled up the family history file I'd backed up to the cloud. There it was. Evidence of a decade of systematic reallocation of client funds. Funds Julian had moved, and Elena had signed off on. If I handed this over to Julian, they might be able to hide the trail. If I handed it to the authorities, the attainment would end in a prison cell. I had 2 lives in my hands. The life of the mother who excluded me, and the life of the brother who looked through me. Picked up the phone. I didn't call Julian. I called a number for the federal investigator listed in the news article. 3 days later, I found myself walking down a sterile white hallway. Not in my hospital in Maine, but back in the city I'd sworn to leave. The air here tasted like exhaust and ego again. Elena wasn't in a hospital in the traditional sense. She was in a high-end private wing, the kind with silk sheets and gourmet menus. Stress, the doctors called it. Acute situational anxiety. In my world we called it getting caught. I walked into the room. She was propped up on pillows, looking fragile in a way that felt rehearsed. Julian was in the corner, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Claire was by the window, staring at her phone, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Maya," Elena breathed, reaching out a hand. "You came. I knew you wouldn't leave your mother in her hour of need. The Count's dear. We need the access codes. Julian says the investigators are being very difficult." I didn't take her hand. I stood at the foot of the bed, my hands in my pockets. "I didn't come here to give you codes, Mom." Julian stood up. "Maya, don't play games. This is our lives. If we don't settle this audit, they're going to freeze everything. The house, the cars, the reputation, it all goes." "It's already gone, Julian," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, colder, sharper. "I spoke to the investigator yesterday. I gave them everything." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was deafening. Elena's hand dropped to the silk sheets. Julian's jaw literally fell open. Claire finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide. You betrayed us," Elena whispered. "After everything I gave you. The roof over your head, the education. You gave me a house, Mom, but you never gave me a home," I said. "And as for the betrayal, I didn't betray you. I just stopped lying for you. There's a difference." I saw the mask finally shatter. Not into sadness, but into pure, unadulterated rage. Elena sat bolt upright, her fragility vanishing in an instant. "Get out," she hissed. "You are no daughter of mine. You are nothing." "I've been nothing to you for 26 years, Mom," I said, turning toward the door. Being nothing is finally starting to feel like freedom. As I walked out of the private wing, I passed two men in dark suits walking in. They didn't look like doctors. They looked like the end of an era. The fallout was spectacular. Within 48 hours, Julian was formally charged. The exclusive brunch at the Sterling was cancelled, not by Elena, but by the club management, who didn't want the energy of a scandal at their tables. I stayed in a cheap motel near the city for the week of the preliminary hearings. I didn't have to be there, but I wanted to see it through. I wanted to see what happened when the power players had to play by the same rules as the people they looked down on. Claire called me one night. She was crying. "They took my car, Maya. They're foreclosing on the house. Where am I supposed to go?" "You have a degree, Claire," I said, sitting on the edge of a lumpy motel bed. "You have a job. You do what I did. You build something that's actually yours, instead of living off the ghosts of someone else's crimes." "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed. "I'm not cold, Claire. I'm just not warm to people who only want to use me as a space heater when they're shivering. Good luck." Hung up. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it was buried under a mountain of relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the luggage. I was the one standing on the platform, watching the train pull away. I drove back toward Maine the next morning. But as I crossed the state line, I realized something. The justice I'd sought wasn't just about the law. It was about the transformation of my own soul. I wasn't just a daughter who disappeared. I was a woman who had finally appeared to herself. I thought I was going back to my quiet life by the sea. But when I pulled up to my leaning cottage, there was a man sitting on my porch steps. A man I hadn't seen in years. A man who held the last piece of the puzzle to who I really was. The man on my porch didn't look like he belonged in a coastal town. He wore a heavy wool coat and held a leather briefcase like it was a shield. When he stood up, I recognized him. Arthur, my father's old law partner. My father had passed away 10 years ago, leaving me with a vague sense of loss and a mother who immediately scrubbed his memory from the house to make room for her new life. "Maya," he said, his voice gravelly. "I heard about the scandal. I heard about what you did with the investigators. If you're here to ask me to recant, Arthur, you've wasted a long drive," I said, my hand tightening on my car keys. "I'm not here for Elena," he said, stepping down into the light. "I'm here because of a trust your father set up." Knew Maya. He knew Elena's ambition was a hunger that could never be satisfied. He knew Julian was being molded in her image. And he knew you were the only one who actually gave a damn about people. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside wasn't just money, though there was enough to buy the cottage 10 times over. There was a letter. My father's handwriting, shaky from the illness that took him, scrolled across the page. "Maya," it read, "they will try to make you feel small because you are kind. They will call your empathy a weakness because it doesn't have a price tag. Don't believe them. This world is held together by the people who show up when the lights go out. Stay true to the dirty jobs, honey. They're the only ones that actually clean the soul." I sat on the steps and cried. Not for the family I lost, but for the girl who had spent a decade thinking she was a disappointment. I hadn't been excluded because I was a failure. I had been excluded because I was the only thing in that house that was real, and my light made their shadows look too long. The money meant I didn't have to work. It meant I could retire at 28. But that wasn't the justice I wanted. The real justice was about to happen in a courtroom 3 states away, and I was going to be there to witness the final curtain call of the gold standard family. The sentencing was quiet. There were no cameras, no garden club friends, no power players. Just a judge, a court reporter, and the cold reality of math. Julian received 5 years. Elena, due to her health and age, received a massive fine that liquidated every asset she owned. The house, the cars, the jewelry, even the silver I had spent my youth polishing. I saw her in the hallway afterward. She looked small. Not fragile small, but diminished. Like a balloon that had finally run out of air. "I hope you're happy," she spat, her voice a ghost of its former authority. "You have nothing now. No family. No status. Just your little job." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No hurt. Just the profound realization that we were speaking 2 different languages. "I have everything, Mom," I said softly. "I have a life where I don't have to look over my shoulder. I have a job where people's last words are thank you, instead of how much. And most importantly, I have a mirror I can actually look into." I walked away. I drove back to Maine, back to my leaning cottage and my salt-crusted porch. I used my father's trust to build a new wing for the hospice center, a place where families can stay for free, where the dirty work is celebrated, and where no one is ever excluded because of their energy. Sometimes people ask me if I regret disappearing. If I regret missing that Mother's Day brunch. I tell them that disappearing was the only way I could finally be seen. I stopped being a character in someone else's play and became the author of my own story. We spend so much time trying to earn a seat at tables where we aren't wanted, forgetting that the most important table is the one we build ourselves. Transformation isn't about getting revenge. It's about outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. It's about realizing that your worth isn't a performance. It's a pulse. And as long as you have that, you have everything. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.